Hello and welcome to this YourTown, Georgina Spotlight episode. In this straight-to-the-point format, our guest, and at least as importantly, their message, is the star of the show. Ben, how are you doing this fine spring day?
It's a beautiful day. Spring is looking up. I'm doing very well, Rob. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. We just got past the eclipse as well. I'm getting into the habit of kind of time stamping these episodes, which by the time this comes out, the eclipse may be a distant memory to our listeners.
It was a big touch point, a big time point. Shielded by clouds, but it's something we'll all remember. I'm
little overcast in terms of the Georgina eclipse experience, but overall, obviously a pretty cool event for all of us.
Definitely.
Well, Ben, I'm always excited for the Spotlight episodes and helping our citizens and fans of Georgina learn a little bit more about the many sources of pride that we have in our town. And I have to say, though, I'm especially excited about today's guest. Now, growing up, there was a lot of reading in our house. My dad always seemed to have a good book on the go, and there was no shortage of magazines lying around that constantly needed tidying up. And I'm not here to perpetuate any gender roles, but my parents' respective magazine subscriptions, they were pretty typical of the time. Mom loved Chatelaine and Canadian Living. My dad, Car and Driver, Motor Trend, Road and Track, Auto Week, you get the picture. I suspect
Definitely
there were... Yeah. I'm guessing there's probably a few of those at your place in Windsor growing up as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking back to when I was about 7 years old, and I was always a bit jealous when these magazines showed up at the house. Number one, because getting mail was fun, at least at that age. And number two, because I could see the enjoyment my parents got out of them. Then one birthday, everything changed for me. My grandparents got me a subscription to Chickadee magazine. Now, do you remember Chickadee, Ben?
I do. It was my first magazine, too.
It was. Okay. So when the first copy arrived in the mailbox, maybe your experience was a little bit like mine, but I don't have to tell you, I was pretty excited. I was excited for one, because this was a magazine all my own. It even had my name printed above the address information, but also because the content was fun, it was interesting, and most importantly, it was accessible to a 7-year-old. And I took my time going through the magazine, looking at the pictures, reading the stories, doing the activities, and getting to know some of the recurring characters. And so it went for a couple of years, and my stack of chickadees slowly got bigger and bigger. Now, my big sister, a few years older, had a subscription to the precursor to Chickadee, which was Owl Magazine. And that was very much the big kid version. And it was almost a rite of passage when I turned 9 and graduated to Owl. How about Owl, Ben? Did you graduate as well?
I know that exact excitement. Yep. Moved on to Owl. It was a great day.
Right. And in preparing for this episode, I was reminiscing with my sister about how fun it was to get the new editions and pull out the wildlife poster. In those days, our bedroom walls were covered with them. And we also talked about the how-to articles and the Dr. Zed features and the What Is It page. I don't know if you remember that one, Ben. It was just a really, really zoomed in picture detail. And then you had to figure out what it was that you were looking at.
That's right.
It's all coming back, right? Yeah. And so, as you can imagine, the owl stack, it started to rival the chickadee stack in my bedroom. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it was generally understood that you didn't throw these magazines out. You collected them. And that goes for me and my friends. And at the time I'm talking about, circulation was reaching about 10% of all preteen Canadian kids. So pretty impressive. So I suspect a number of our listeners remember exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe their kids are having the same experience today with Chickadee, with Owl, or maybe the youngest member of the family added in 1997, Chirp magazine. But why are we talking about all of this? Well, for good reason. The co-founder of these magazines is a proud Georgina citizen. And I'm talking about member of the Order of Canada, member of the Order of Ontario, Annabel Slaight. Now, how cool is that?
That is fantastic.
All right. Well, something certainly to be proud of. But here's the thing. Annabel's work with the Owl family of magazines and ultimately television shows is reason enough to have a chat. Yet, when we start to dive a little bit deeper, we realize that the story of Annabel Slaight doesn't stop there. She's a past chair of the Shaw Communications Rocket Fund, which is a nonprofit organization that's invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars into Canadian kids' television and digital programs. She was a co-founder of the Ladies of the Lake, a volunteer organization that raised awareness about Lake Simcoe and the environmental challenges it faces, later morphing into the Ontario Water Centre. She's a provincial appointee to the Lake Simcoe Coordinating Committee, and she's on the board of directors, the founding chair, actually, of Georgina's own Clearwater Farm. So Annabel is also one of the creators of the Georgina book, which celebrates our town and its history with fascinating images, stories, anecdotes, and some very cool maps. Now, here's the thing. I could keep going, but I think I've made the case, Ben, that in a podcast about community pride, we would be remiss not to dedicate an episode to our very own Annabel Slaight. Annabel, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the YourTown Georgina podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. It's very exciting to hear about this new venture in Georgina.
Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm. That means a lot. And I normally like to start by asking our guests about their Georgina origin story, a kind of how did you come to live here piece. But I'd like to do things a bit differently with this one and take a more chronological approach, if that works for you.
There's a long chronology in this one.
Okay, well, in that case, I may be selective, and I did debate on how far back that we should go. But let's at least address the fact that you grew up in Toronto. That's right. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and let's do a little bit of foreshadowing. I mean, I think we know where we're headed with this interview based on the preamble that I did with Ben, but I understand that long before Al and Chickadee, you were publisher and editor of Heath Street News at the age of 8, the ripe old age of 8. Do I have that right?
I was in Toronto, yeah, near St. Clair and Yonge in Toronto. I wanted very much to have a printing press for my 8th birthday for
Very
Christmas.
cool.
And lo and behold, I got one. And thus my career in publishing began.
It all started at 8. What an interesting, this is the thing I need at 8 years old is a printing press. We need to start getting the news out there, getting the word out there.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was fun and love to tell stories and love to involve all the other kids on the street. So we had a circulation of 25.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
It was very low tech in those days because carbon paper was involved in laying between the sheets of paper so that you could type the stories onto the paper, and then the person who got the 6th copy was pretty faint.
Right. Okay, that's so interesting. So the seeds were planted though for what was to come at 8 years old. Kind of the foundation had already been built.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, the other connection is actually with Lake Simcoe because my family had a cottage on the other side of the lake, and I just love this lake. And so the combination of the lake and nature and getting a printing press and wanting to do a little newspaper started me off on what lasted my entire life.
That's amazing. So, and ultimately, obviously, I want to get to the Georgina story, but your history with the lake goes back that far. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I used to spend hours on the beach, making little villages and making rafts out of driftwood, and it was a wonderful thing, that lake. I can still feel the water on my feet, and where we were, the sand was in sort of waves.
Yeah.
And I can still feel that feeling on my feet when I think about it.
Amazing how that sticks with you. Eh?
It's just, nature is so important for kids, and it changes the way you look at the world and and you are with the world.
It was actually going to be a future question as pertaining to, have you always had an interest in nature? But it sounds like really what triggered that off was your experiences here with the lake.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an academic relationship with nature. It was just being with it.
Yeah.
Taking walks in woods and
Yeah.
doing all the things that people here in Georgina can do all the time.
Yeah.
And any kid who has an opportunity to have those kinds of experiences, I can tell you, it gets you off to a great start.
Yeah.
In life.
I agree. I share some of those. I mean, I moved here when I was 7 years old. And so, I grew up on the water. I was fortunate to have waterfront property growing up. And so what you're describing to me is, I can relate
Yeah.
Well, we're going to obviously be circling back to Georgina, but I want to fill in some gaps in between sort of then and now. And I do know that there was a period where you didn't just leave this area in Toronto. You actually went all the way to British Columbia for school. We actually share that in common. We're both Ontarians who decided to do post-secondary education in BC. Now, what was behind the decision to move west for school?
Well, in fact, I'm one of those Canadians who's lived on both coasts and in the middle as well. My dad's business, he got a different job and moved to BC. And we lived in Nova Scotia when my dad was in the Second World War, which is going to give people a little bit of a clue.
So if they haven't Googled it already, right? Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. That's interesting. So you've been on both coasts. That's great. That's a lot of perspective, obviously, to have, and something that likely fed into future endeavors.
And there's water on both coasts, you know, and the same love that I had for the lake and seeing it and getting into it, and I did the same thing in Nova Scotia and also in BC.
That's a common theme that's kind of running through here. The water, that is. It makes a lot of sense in terms of what we're going to talk about maybe a little bit later. So now in my research, I understand you went to UBC. Is that correct? It's pretty well documented that you had a mixed relationship with school. Is that how you would put it?
Oh, well, yes. I loved school, but what I loved about school was doing projects and doing stuff with other kids. And, ultimately I became a teacher. So I can't have a completely awful relationship with school.
Yeah.
No, I was never an academic whiz, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think that's there's probably an underlying message there that you don't always have to be a straight A student to appreciate the value and be passionate about education. I mean, I think those two things can operate separately very well. But I'm assuming then, you mentioned a moment ago that you had an early career as an elementary school teacher. Did that also help shape what was ultimately to come?
Well, the interesting thing was I ended up being a teacher because my father said, when I announced that I might like to be a writer or a newspaper reporter or something like that, and he said, no, you can't do that, because if you don't get married and have somebody look after you, you won't be able to support yourself. So you got two choices, Annabel. You could either be a teacher or you could be a nurse. And I sure knew I didn't want to be a nurse. So I took the teacher route. And, ultimately it all worked out in the end, because actually having been a teacher was a great experience. And I probably never would have got involved in starting Owl magazine or any of the other things that I did had I not been a teacher. So, it's interesting, when you look back on how your life unfolds, one of the best things I think you can do is just let it unfold. One thing kind of leads to the next.
Well said. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that you can't plan it out. Now that said, I mean, some people and some kids have a very clear direction and drive, and I think that's great and that's commendable. But I do think that sometimes there's an unfair pressure sitting with the guidance counselor in those later years of high school to sort of map things out. And in my experience, you can't predict where life is going to take you. And it seems like that was your approach. You're open to what was to come.
Well, it seems to be that you also did the same thing. I mean, one thing kind of led to another.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I definitely, I definitely didn't have this vision when I sat with that guidance counselor in grade 12. But that was not the case. Yeah. But that's okay. I mean, I think there's something to be said, to your point, to kind of roll with it. And in terms of rolling with it, I know that there was a transition back to Toronto for the next stage of your career, and this obviously led to journalism. Is this how did that transition happen to come back to Ontario?
Well, there was a little journey between BC and back to Toronto, which took me to Europe.
Okay.
For about a year and a half, and I just sort of wandered around.
Good for you.
And ended up in London, and I landed in London 2 days before Christmas. I didn't know anyone. And I went to Canada House, which I had heard had a wall where people were looking for flatmates. So I looked up, and there was sort of only one on the wall.
Yeah.
So I called them up and said, could I come over? And as it turned out, the person who was looking for a flatmate was involved in journalism. She was a magazine editor in London. And so there was the little girl who wanted to be a magazine or a writer or do something with publications, ended up right in the thick of things.
Wow.
So there were newspaper reporters who came to the house. There were friends, all kinds of people who were breaking news and writing about interesting things, all happening right under my very nose.
Wow.
While I was teaching school. So I went to school during the day and then came home in the evening to this wonderful world of adventure where I had always wanted to be in the first place.
It's amazing. That's amazing. That kind of speaks to a moment ago what you just said, just being open to what the universe is going to put in front of you and taking advantage of maybe some of those chance encounters and what they could mean.
Yeah. So when I came back to Toronto, I decided that I would apply for a job on an architectural magazine. And I mean, honestly, I knew little about what I was doing. I really didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know anything. So I got this job that was kind of worked in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to have one eye on the things that I was really interested in and another eye on my job.
Yeah.
And, that's a great piece of advice. If you want to go somewhere and you can't get in the front door, go in the side door.
Good call. Yeah, good call. Whatever gets you there ultimately, how you do it. I mean, sometimes we have to be creative. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it was during this time, if I'm not mistaken, in your life that you met Marianne Brinkman. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, Marianne came a little later because the architectural magazine ended up being bought by another person.
I see.
And ultimately, it didn't do all that well financially. So the person who bought it said, well, Annabel, you're with us now. What would you like to do? You don't have a job anymore. And I said, well, it would be really wonderful if Canada had more publishing for kids. There aren't very many books that are published in Canada for Canadian kids. And so we actually started by publishing a few kids' books.
Okay, yeah. Okay, and now was this with, and where does the connection with Marianne come in? Was she a partner from the very beginning?
Marianne had worked for a magazine called The Young Naturalist.
Okay.
And I have to say, Marianne, my friend, it was really boring and awful. And it sort of had
The statute of limitations is we can say that.
It
now.
had
Yeah,
a
right, okay.
page that said "The Fox," and then it had 2 columns of type and a picture of a fox.
Gotcha.
And it wasn't exactly just a whiz bang for kids.
Understood.
So it didn't do very well financially either after having gone for many, many years. And so the people who published it were looking for somebody to take it over. There were 11,000 subscribers, believe it or not. That's pretty good.
Yeah, sure.
And so Marianne and this magazine came to the same place where I was doing kids' books. And we decided, well, maybe we should try and take this magazine and make it something that kids really love.
That's great. And which ultimately became OWL, and which of course it's pretty well established. This is the first nationwide children's nature magazine.
And OWL stood for Outdoors and Wildlife.
Outdoors and Wildlife. Yeah, it's easy to forget that one's an acronym.
Yeah,
great.
Well, we really struggled with the name. We had a terrible name.
Were there any other ones that were close, or what could it have been? Do you recall? Can you recall?
Oh, one of them was the sound of the Canada goose. Honk.
Honk. Oh, that's great. Imagine when that first episode of Honk landed. Yeah. Sounds a little strange coming out of my mouth.
Not the best choice.
So can I ask you, what was it like producing that very first one? I'm curious, did you have a vision for the format, and where did the content come from for that very first issue?
Well, we knew we needed some stars. Mm-hmm. So we found somebody who knew Farley Mowat.
Oh, yeah. Amazing.
The writer.
Of course.
And asked if he could get Farley Mowat to write a story about his Newfoundland water dog. And Farley, the truth can be told now, is that Farley Mowat's are you kidding? I don't want to write a story for this kids magazine. What
the irony of that, because I remember sitting while my teachers read Farley Mowat directly to us, and while we sat on the circle. So yeah.
So this person who approached Farley Mowat said, "We could just do it together. We'll all sit down with you and we'll write the story." And it was wonderful. It was a beautiful picture of Farley Mowat swimming with his dog in the water.
Amazing.
And then we had Jack Rabbit Johansson, who was 101 years old and was still cross-country skiing.
Wow.
And it just the content kind of unfolded. A lot of it, and always and throughout my entire work with kids, is that we spend a lot of time talking with kids about what they want.
Great. Yeah, great. So this was kind of a bottom-up approach. We're starting with the audience, and that's kind of is essentially determining the content.
Yeah. I mean, we said Farley Mowat and Jack Rabbit Johansson, so we have two sort of, we come out of the box saying, and yes, we've got...
Big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the rest of the content wasn't... I mean, Dr. Zed, of which you spoke.
Yeah, big fan.
Actually, that began as an ink blot. So we just threw some ink on a page and drew eyes and things on it, and it became a little scientist.
Amazing.
And then we met Gord Penrose, who became Dr. Zed, because we'd heard that he was sort of the wondrous science teacher. He just loved, and he was the archetypal hair that went all over everywhere.
Perfect.
And the white lab coat and everything. Yeah. And when we went to his classroom, we walked in the door, and there he was. He was surrounded by kids and stuff going on, and we said, "Oh my goodness, Dr. Zed, it's you!"
That's amazing. That's exactly how I picture him, actually.
Yeah. He was fabulous, man, fabulous.
So can I ask, in terms of those early days, could you see the future success? I mean, you mentioned there was kind of a vacuum there. There was a gap that kind of needed to be filled in terms of this content. Or was it kind of like, hey, we're going to throw some things at the wall. We're going to see if it sticks. What was it like in those early days? Could you see the potential in what was happening?
Well, we certainly could see that there was potential because we could see that kids were enjoying it.
Yeah.
We did not see how difficult it was going to be. Very difficult financially.
Right.
And we actually approached Shell Oil to ask them if they would like to be a sponsor. And they said, because we did a prototype issue before we started regular publication.
Right.
And they said, if you can get one review in a national magazine that's positive, we'll give you $50,000 as an investment, which is a lot of money these days.
Sure.
Still is, actually.
Yeah, it still is.
And so we did, and they sent Mordecai Richler
really?
to do the story.
Wow.
And Mordecai, early in the morning, was not an ebullient, sort of enthusiastic person. He kind of sat slumped in a chair, listening and looking. And I thought, oh, I think we've blown this.
Really?
And he went away, and a week later came out the story he had a column on the back page, and it was fabulous. And we got the $50,000, and
wow, we
moved forward from there. But it was always a bit of a hand to mouth.
I imagine.
Because the problem with a kids magazine, as opposed to others, is that your audience keeps growing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they disappear every 3 years.
Right.
And the most expensive part of making a magazine is these stories are no longer true, because everybody does everything differently with social media, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And technology always does have something to do with media.
Yeah, of course.
What it is. And we found that the cost of bringing in new subscribers was the most expensive cost we had.
Okay.
So we came up with a brilliant idea of, well, if we need to hold kids for longer, why don't we start another magazine?
Okay.
And I remember our board of directors saying, you come here every 4 weeks or so, and you tell us the woes, the financial woes, and how difficult it is, and now you want to start another magazine?
You're like, no, but this is what's going to get us there.
Yeah, and it did help. It really did help.
Well, I mean, Ben and I are great examples of that, because we, at the time, we weren't quite ready for OWL, right? And so it made a lot of sense, and it was perfect too, because I had an older sibling, I was the younger one, and so we both got plugged in, but in different ways that suited where we were.
So we had you for potentially 8 years instead of for 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant approach. It's a tough sell, I imagine, at the initial stage, the concept, but it played out. It played out pretty well.
It was wonderful, and then ultimately it led to Chirp. Being a preschool magazine. Yeah. So
why don't we, for our listeners anyway, we'll save them the Google, and we'll point out that OWL magazine, the first 1970, it was late 1970s. Do I have that right? And Chickadee followed in the mid 80s, I believe. But I believe OWL was late 70s when it started.
Yeah.
And then Chirp in mid to late 90s, I think, came from there. And that kind of finished completed the cycle, or the graduation.
And in the meantime, we started OWL TV, and and also a whole line of books, and so in fact it was an early version of a multi-media property.
Yeah. Now I want to get to the television and sort of the growth to that as well. Just before we sort of leave the magazine side of it, was there a defining moment when you knew that you had something special? Perhaps a moment where you could exhale and really appreciate what you had accomplished?
I think it happened almost every day, because one of the things that we believed in is that communications with kids is a two-way street.
Yeah.
And so we got a lot of mail. We had a person, Mitch, her name was, whose job was to open the mail and answer every letter.
That's amazing. Every letter?
Every letter.
Wow.
Every drawing, every letter, everything.
Well, that's huge.
And so dropping by Mitch's desk and seeing what was going on today was the confirmation that kept us all going and made us laugh.
That's great.
yeah, it was to see that it was actually doing
That's great.
something.
That's great because I mean when I was doing my research, obviously there's countless awards that I came across that were attributed to or given to the publications themselves. In 1992, OWL won the Ed Press or ED Press Award as the best children's magazine in North America. I mean that's huge. So I'm thinking about those things, but what you just described, I mean, that's kind of the ultimate indicator of success, given that, as you mentioned, the kids were kind of driving the content. So to get that kind of feedback, it must have been so rewarding.
Yeah, it's great.
Wow. Okay. Now, of course, as we talked about just a moment ago, the magazines were kind of just the start. Ultimately, you had the opportunity to reach your target audience through a whole new medium, and that, of course, was television. Was that always a goal, or was it just a natural outcome of the growth and kind of the interest that you were seeing in these magazines?
No, it was never planned. Although we did have a consultant who came and talked to us about what our vision of the future could be. And we had an artist drawing out the dreams that we had. And, we had everything from, wildlife parks to TV, to radio. I mean, we didn't have podcasts in those days.
No, that's right.
But so we did envision the magazine being more than just a magazine, because in fact, it wasn't just a magazine. It was a relationship.
Yeah, well said.
And so that relationship did not need to be one-dimensional.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the reality is that kids watch TV, right? So why not put some content that sort of lines up with the objectives, the educational, the informational, the entertaining goals that the magazines have.
And we started actually TV with somebody approached us about doing a Dr. Zed show.
Yeah.
And so we actually did a little pilot for that. And we took it to Canadian broadcasters, and they went, ew, I don't know about this. But we happened to take it to New York, where we met a person who knew people at PBS.
Yeah.
And we went in and talked about what the magazine was all about and what the TV show might be sort of like.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. They said, great, let's we're going to give you a bit of money to make a pilot and see if you can find some more, because we're not going to give you enough.
Of course, yeah.
And so we did, and we made the pilot. And actually, OWL TV was the first Canadian show to be sold to public television in the United States.
That's just incredible. That's just incredible. And I didn't realize that in terms of the kind of the order of operations or the chronology, it was on PBS before, but eventually on CBC. Am I right? So,
after we got PBS,
wow, PBS came first, and then CBC.
We came back to Canada, and we couldn't. I mean, everybody wanted it.
They took another look. They're like, we might have missed the boat on this one. Let's talk again.
Yeah. So CBC was our Canadian partner.
That's amazing. What a huge win. I mean, PBS is, I mean, it's talk about reach in terms of.
Yeah, it was wonderful. We had, and our presenting station was WNET in New York.
Yeah.
And they were the people who produced Nature, that wonderful.
Yeah.
So they loved nature shows, and they were great at helping us find stories. And
so you had content support as well. That's amazing. And now, in terms of its run, again, there's a long list of awards. I mentioned Annabel, and for our listeners, I'll point out that among the many awards, a Gemini for Best Children's Television Program. I mean, and that must have been a nice win after the initial rejection from CBC, anyway.
Yeah. Well, you don't blame people for rejecting people who walk in who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, sure.
And come up with a big idea. I mean, you have to have rejections.
Yeah, that's good perspective. Did you have it at the time, or is that perspective that you have now?
It wasn't deterring us.
Yeah, good.
So you just know for every forward step,
Yeah.
and whatever you do is going to take a few backward steps.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, that's a good, certainly a good message. And I know that we're jumping around a little bit, maybe chronologically, but since we're discussing programming, in my preamble, I mentioned the Shaw Communications Rocket Fund. Could you tell me just a little bit about your involvement and the goals of the Rocket Fund?
That was after I retired from OWL. The Rocket Fund was being started because television in Canada for kids, Canadians seem to have quite an aptitude for that. I don't know whether you know, but a lot of the really great kids television shows of the world actually come from Canada. I don't know why it is, but
I wasn't aware of
that. Our gentle nature and perhaps the Canadian sense of humor a bit.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But there was an opportunity to have the Shaw family out in Calgary.
Yeah.
They had cable and phones and other things with their business, who wanted to put some money into helping Canadian children's television grow and be successful financially. So actually the Rocket Fund invested in Canadian programming, and I forget what the number is, but it's huge. I mean, it's
my research said hundreds of millions is what, like in terms of
I think
what it added up
a couple
to.
of $100 million over the years.
Amazing.
And it's sort of winding down now, but because it's a different world than it was then.
Sure.
But it was wonderful because the Shaw Rocket Fund promoted Canadian children's television around the world. It helped Canadians meet people that they needed in Germany and wherever they needed to meet people.
Right.
Because co-productions are one way to get television shows made. You find partners in other places who can add to what you're doing and add financing.
Yeah.
And so there's a wonderful constituency of people right around the world, all of whom know all these people in Canada for all the wonderful things that Canadians have done in terms of television.
You know, of all the things that we are known for, globally, in the past, United Nations peacekeeping, the Canadarm, this one I did not know. I didn't know that we were kind of an authority on children's programming worldwide. That's pretty cool to learn. Mm-hmm. And I guess collectively, I'll point out for our listeners that your efforts in the area of broadcasting led to a Canadian Film and Television Lifetime Achievement Award as well. I'm certain a very rewarding experience for all of that work. I know it's not about the awards, and you pointed it out well earlier.
Well, it was very nice to be honored, and because the industry, as well as the programs, the industry needed some support and help. It needed government to know what a fantastic job Canadians were doing in this field.
Yeah.
It needed all sorts of people to know how important it is to a country to have stories that come from your own country.
Yeah. Yeah, well said.
The books and television and magazines and whatever. Yeah. If you see them coming from your own country and you feel a part of that, it's a very important part of growing up.
That's great perspective. And the idea of storytelling as an educational instrument is something I firmly believe in. And I'm involved in education, but more on the adult side and from a training perspective. And storytelling is one of the areas that we put most of our focus, because we can list all the facts and figures and theories, but you tell a good story and you make that emotional connection, you can really move the needle in terms of those learning outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And there's an underlying, sensing an underlying theme that it wasn't, this hasn't necessarily been about filling that vacuum for kids in Canada, but it's a passion for educating and entertaining kids around the world, which is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, and having kids in Canada see what they have in common and what's different from kids in other places.
I love it. I love it. Well, we've been reminiscing a lot about the amazing history of OWL and its sister publications, but bringing it into the future, we should remind our listeners that OWL, Chickadee, Chirp are still in publication, but I've noticed that the experience has been modernized quite a bit as well. In addition to the magazines themselves, there are websites with videos and activities and contests that kids can engage with.
Yes, interactivity is the big thing. And magazines, when you actually come right down to it, are pretty interactive things anyway. I mean, you were doing the what's it puzzles.
I love this. I loved it. It was. I have such good memories, and I had a lot of fun in preparing for this episode, talking with my sister and reminiscing about that. I had forgotten that our walls that's all they were. Were the wildlife posters that we pulled out of them, and with Ben as well in the preamble and getting his perspective. He grew up 4 or 5 hours away from me, but had very similar memories of this experience. And maybe so for the parents here in Georgina, beyond the great educational value of these resources, there's perhaps an added incentive to maybe check them out with our local connection to our neighbor Annabel Slaight. I think that's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say a hearty thank you for the hours and hours of entertainment and education, of course, that you provided me in those very formative years.
And look how well you turned out.
Perhaps debatable, but I feel it was a fantastic experience. So thank you again. So there you have it, Ben. The end of the first part of our interview with Annabel Slaight. What'd you think?
I thought it was great. Really learned some interesting things. I loved her approach. Roll with it, take chances. You never know how things will kind of settle off. And
yeah.
And also, is Farley Mowat being kind of hesitant to join OWL? Is that a YourTown exclusive?
It may very well be a YourTown exclusive. We cracked that one here.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought, right?
Big news.
And this thing is evolving. But you make a good point. There were some good takeaways throughout the interview. I thought, she made this, she gave us this one message of, if you can't go in the front door, if that's not obvious, then you go in the side door. You just figure out how to make it happen, right?
Absolutely. Love great messaging.
Yeah.
It really is.
And it's one thing that I didn't know until very late in my research before doing the interview is that it all started, when she was still in single digits with Heath Street News, a special one for you, of course.
It's true. Yeah. Heath is my son's name. So my ears perked up during the interview when I heard that.
But it also related to, she commented on the connection to the lake very early on. Again, I learned that she was a resident here not too long ago, but had no idea that her connection began when she was a child.
Yeah. And she met her husband at a cottage. I mean, it really all comes together for her.
Yeah, it's pretty wild and interesting to come sort of full circle and think about what those early years, what impact they might have had on what was to come with OWL and Chickadee magazine. I certainly was very far from making that connection when I was sitting down at my home in Keswick as a kid reading those magazines.
Little did you know,
right? Yeah, Farley Mowat dropped in there, Mordecai Richler. I mean, kind of an interesting story how that all unfolded. But I thought also one of the things that really opened my eyes wide was the fact that they had a difficult time selling the show, the television show in Canada, but they go down to New York City, they go to the offices of PBS, and they're like, let's do this. Here's some cash. We'll figure out how to get it done. And that had to happen before actually coming back to Canada and getting that on the air.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, PBS, that's just such a powerhouse.
Not small.
No.
And the first Canadian television to be sold to PBS, which was pretty cool. Not surprising, obviously led to the Broadcasting Lifetime Achievement Award, one of many awards that we talked about during that interview. But all of it surrounded and by this love of nature and how important it is to form relationships to it. She kind of brought that up multiple times, and I think that is special coming from her, given her relationship with our town, and it's a good reminder about just what a good thing we have here in the town of Georgina.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, That concludes part 1 of our chat with Georgina's own Annabel Slaight. And I do hope that for those of you that have had similar relationships with Owl and its sister publications, that maybe this was informative and even an enjoyable walk down memory lane. And for those who are new to Annabel and her work, I hope you found it interesting, and perhaps you or your children will also grow to know and love the many great publications and resources that we talked about in this episode. So join us next time for part 2, when we explore the many products of Annabel's hard work and dedication to our town. It's quite the list. But until then, this is the YourTown Georgina podcast. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And if you like what you heard, rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And with that, let's turn it over to our friend Bernadette Connors. We'll see you next time.
I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a lady of the lake. I learned to drive on a dirt road, and I got all it takes. I see myself in the water, and my footprints in the sand. The moon can push and pull the tide, but this is where I stand. Georgina, I could never really leave ya. I've been all around the world and still you bring me back again. Georgina, I've got friends in the city, they've got a tower and everything. I tried it out for a little while, but where you don't have roots, you can't grow wings. Georgina, I could never really leave ya. I've been all around the world and still you bring me back again. Georgina, when I'm gone I dream ya. Late at night, later on, you're always on my mind. Georgina, should I stay or should I go? I'll always be scared of the great unknown. I see myself in the water,